recognizing again that you are doing something that the rest of society is telling you is wrong. So, of course, that social pressure is going to add to the second thoughts and the ambivalence and the feeling like I'm doing something wrong, I'm doing something bad, those feelings of guilt, all super common.
Welcome to Sensitive Stories. This episode is for educational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for treatment with a mental health or medical professional. Let's dive in.
Welcome back, Sharon. Some listeners might remember you from episode 17. We dove into the topic of boundaries, and we're now talking about something adjacent to that, about your new book, Cutting Ties with Parents. Something that's personally relatable to me, so I'm excited to dive into this with you. I did want to start off by debunking a myth. We often hear that people assume this is a decision taken lightly. It's not thought through. Could you share why most people come to this decision that they need to cut ties with a parent or even a close family member?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to talk about this topic, and I think this is a really good and important place for us to begin because there is a lot of misinformation that gets put out into the world. And I think, again, we see a lot of this on social media, as we do on other topics as well. That there tends to be this narrative that adult children who cut ties with their parents are doing something that is selfish, it's mean, it's a rash decision that they haven't thought through, that they don't really have valid reasons for it, and that they should really just, sort of get with the program,
Right.
be a part of the family. And again, I think there's part of this narrative is this is how everybody has done it in the past, is you just deal with the family, no matter how dysfunctional it is, just show up, care for your elderly parents if that's the situation you're in, or, put up with the family member that abused you as a child. And, it really is this, again, sort of this dysfunctional narrative of just deal with it because they're your family. And I'll tell you, as in writing this book, I did a lot of research. So I read all of the academic research that has been done about why adult children cut ties with their parents. And I've also been a therapist who's worked with many, many adult children who have been in this situation over the years. And the answers are actually surprisingly consistent, that adult children almost always say that they cut ties with their parents or family because they have been abused, mistreated, betrayed, not respected, rejected, not accepted for who they are, some variation on that. Um, and so they feel like they have been mistreated by their families. And this is typically um, a pattern that began in childhood, that their family did not treat them well growing up and has continued into adulthood. So they are now grown adults in relationship with their parents or other family members, and they continue to be disrespected and criticized and put down, and again, emotionally abused, sometimes physically abused. Right. So it's not a healthy relationship for them. There are, of course, some other reasons. I would say, again, this is, mostly what we're talking about here is abusive, or what we often nowadays sort of call toxic relationships. But certainly there are situations where there is an adult child who has a major mental health problem or a substance problem that can lead to the deterioration of the relationship and them cutting off contact with their families. And there are also situations that I think we hear more about now today of just differing values between adult children and their family of origin. Um, which again, I think if we really got into that, we would see that there's an overlap there between the differing values and the feeling mistreated. It's not simply that we disagree, it's the way that that plays out in the relationship. So that's really what adult children are saying, is this is years in the making for me. This has been a long time coming. I have thought about this. I have tried various amounts of contact. I have tried different ways of expressing my grievances, of asking for things to change, and it hasn't changed. And again, so
Mm-hmm.
not something that is just a one-off that we're talking about for
Yes.
the most part. I think sometimes it feels like that to the rest of the family, which again, if we really got into it, we would start
Yes.
to see that there's a communication breakdown such
Yeah.
that the adult child has been trying to say there's a problem and people have not been listening. They have not wanted to hear it. They have
Mm-hmm.
minimized it. They have not
Yes.
wanted to deal with it, which again is, very much a hallmark of a lot of
Mm-hmm.
dysfunctional families is we just don't deal with problems. We scapegoat somebody, we
Yes.
shove the problem under the rug and try to
Exactly.
pretend like everything's fine here.
Exactly. This problem didn't just begin. This is a years long problem where the child often has tried multiple times to be heard, to be seen, to shift the pattern of what's happening in the family. And it's often not just happening with the parent, it's happening with the grandparent, and the rest of the family as well. And yeah, we've been told to, like you said, get with the program, right? Just fall in line, do what you're told,
Yeah.
look the other way. And you get to a point where there's a limit. You can only take so much, and it starts to then impact your own mental health, your own sanity, your own physical health even. And you have to maybe think, okay, I need to change something.
Yes, and
Yeah.
it often starts interfering with other relationships that the adult
Yes.
child has with their
Yes.
partner
Yeah.
or with their own children. I often see
Mm-hmm.
things reach, a breaking point sometimes when somebody has their own children and they say, I don't
Yes.
want to repeat this pattern. I don't want my parents to do to my children what they did to me. Or
Yeah.
again, I just, I see that there are
Mm-hmm.
problems here and I want to protect my kids from them
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Absolutely. You want to break that cycle.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to make the hard decision and potentially become the scapegoat of, or the maybe the problem person in the family.
Yes, the black
Mm-hmm.
sheep.
The black sheep. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
I know we have scapegoats and black sheep.
I know.
What's up with that? But yeah, and one of the things that I always say to my clients, because a lot of them are,
Yeah.
what the scapegoat or the black sheep of the
Sure.
family is, often the person who's in that role, the one who has been cast out and
Yeah.
really vilified, is often
Yeah.
the healthiest person emotionally in that family because they are the
Yes.
one who is calling out the problems that nobody
Yes.
else wants to acknowledge, which
Exactly.
again means you can't be a part of the family group in the same way
Yeah.
because you're over here saying, hey, something's got to change. This is not healthy. This is abusive. We've got
Mm-hmm.
we've got issues here. So,
Yeah.
but of course, that is a healthy thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is how we, get ourselves mentally healthy. This is how we get relationships healthier as we
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge problems, we figure out how to solve them if
Yes.
possible, and, then things can change. But if
Mm-hmm.
if we don't, then we just, right, that's the being stuck in the cycle. It just goes on and on and on that
Exactly.
nobody's doing anything about it.
Exactly. And to maintain your own health, you do have to break that cycle and then risk disrupting the family. Does that mean that you're then losing your other family members? This is something I'm always trying to figure out. Do you have to then cut ties with other folks who maybe don't understand your decision, or you're then risking being in contact with a family member you don't want to be with, so then you're kind of opting out of the family system altogether?
Well, it's complicated and it's
Yeah, yeah.
it's not the same for everybody. But to be honest, I think people need to understand that that is a possibility, not
Yes.
necessarily because you have decided if I cut ties with my parents, I also have to cut ties with my grandparents or my siblings, but sometimes
Right.
they cut ties with you. Because again, when you're the one who is essentially disrupting the family system, you are challenging the hierarchy in
Mm,
the family and the power dynamics. That means that oftentimes the person who has the most power, so we'll just say just call this the abusive person in the
mm,
family for our purposes right now, right, they feel challenged because you are, again, you're calling it out and you're sort of setting that ultimate boundary of saying, I'm not putting up with this, I'm going to opt out of this, I'm going to distance myself or
mm.
have no contact with you. They will then try to get the rest of the family members on their side,
Right.
and again scapegoat you and say
Mm-hmm.
you're the problem, and this is what we will see as sort of the smear campaign.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people will talk about this where there's gossip, there's rumors, rumors, they're bad
Mm.
mouthing you, they're
Mhm.
really just making up often a lot of just unbelievable stuff about you. Well, I shouldn't say it's unbelievable because some people do
Right.
believe it, and that's why
Sure.
it's so hurtful and dangerous. But I mean, it's unbelievable in the sense that it's completely unfounded
Mhm.
things, but for the very specific purposes of damaging you and your reputation and
Yes.
trying to get the rest of the family to again cut ties with you.
Mm. Mhm.
And I would say that really is an effort to punish you for
Yes.
standing up to them because that
Right.
feels like that's again going against everything about the way this family system is trying to operate. So
Right.
anyway, with that being said, it I would say it also depends on the strength and the type of relationship that you had with other family members prior to
Mhm.
cutting ties. It's not impossible to maintain
Mm.
relationships with some family members. Sometimes you can do that separately. So for example, if it was, the holidays and you opted out of the main family
Right.
get together, maybe it's possible for you to do something a different time with your sister.
Mhm.
Or if it's a family wedding and you've decided that you're not going to go to that, again, maybe there's a way for you to celebrate that couple apart from
Yes.
the main family gatherings and
Mhm.
celebrations. So sometimes we can do that.
Mhm.
I would encourage people, if that's important to them, to try to figure out ways to maintain those relationships. But of course, I think it's important that we're realistic and understanding that sometimes,
Yeah.
because the way family relationships are interconnected, that we do lose connections with other people as well.
Absolutely. And as you said, it's not our choice. Other people are going to buckle down and want to preserve that family system.
Yeah.
So you have to have folks who are willing to step outside of it. You mentioned, the phrase no contact. What's the difference between no contact and low contact?
Hmm. Yeah, well, no contact, I would say, is pretty much what it sounds like, where you have
Yeah.
said, right, there's nothing. We are
Yes.
not going to see each other in person. We're not going to have any form of communication or interaction. This is usually, the most extreme. So it might
Mhm.
include blocking phone numbers, blocking
Yeah.
people on social media. Um, and again, sometimes it is so that you're not having contact with that person directly, but also you don't want to sort of be getting any information about them that's coming
Right.
in, because again, it can be very upsetting and very hurtful to be seeing what they are doing or what they are saying online or in other
Mm-hmm.
forums. And then low contact is something in between of fully engaged in the relationship and having no contact. And really probably the most accurate way for us to think about family estrangement is on a spectrum. Um, that it is very common. I would say the most common scenario really is that people have varying amounts of contact with their family over time that ebbs and flows. So we
Mm-hmm.
have a little contact, we have more contact, something happens, and then we pull back and there's less, or there might be a year or two even of no contact, and then something
Mm-hmm.
changes and you decide, I'm going to give it another try, or it's grandma's
Yeah.
funeral and I really want to
Right.
go. And so then have some contact. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea of completely no contact is certainly an option, and it
Mm-hmm.
works and it holds for some people, I would say forever, but I would say the far
Yeah.
more common is really that there's this shifting of sort of some flexibility in that, but again, with the specific intention that you are going to be mindful about how much contact you have, and you're constantly evaluating, is this working for me? Having this much contact is, has something changed and it makes sense for me to have more contact?
Mm.
Is this working out or is it not? And do I need to pull back?
Yes. Right.
Um, so yeah, so it really often
Yeah.
changes for people. And I think sometimes that's just helpful to know that that's really
Mm-hmm.
common. So if you set out thinking, okay, I'm cutting ties, I'm not going to have contact with this person or people, and then you end up having some contact, that's not a failure on your
Okay.
part, right? That doesn't have to
Right.
be the end goal is not necessarily I should
Yes.
be having no contact with somebody who has been hurtful for me. It
Yes.
is figuring out what makes sense for you. How much capacity do you have for
Mm-hmm.
being in this relationship at this moment? And again, that changes for people. I just sort of call it sort of like your emotional bandwidth. Like, do you
Yes.
have the ability? Do you have the coping skills? Do you have the support system? What else is going on in your life? And
Yes.
again, if you're thinking about a specific event, you might say, okay, well, this holiday season, I really don't have the bandwidth. There's a lot of other things going on in my
Right.
life, in the world. I just can't do it. That might not be the case a
Mm-hmm.
year or 2 years from now. And so if things change, again, either with you or with the family, um, things can change with the relationship and the amount of contact as well.
Mm-hmm. And it's helpful to know there's flexibility and you get to decide to lean in or lean away or pull away depending on what's going on. And you may want to break that contact, that no contact, so you get to attend a funeral, a wedding, or you may not. And I love that flexibility of how am I doing in the moment? What capacity, emotional bandwidth do I have? And I can decide there.
Mhm.
Let's say you're starting to second guess your decision. Does that automatically mean, okay, I'm gonna lessen my boundary there, or are there times where you then kind of maybe double down? I'm just curious, what direction do you go when you're second guessing? Is what does that mean when that's happening?
Okay, well, again, I would say it's really common, completely normal to be ambivalent about it. And it definitely doesn't mean that you're making the wrong decision or
Yeah,
that you're doing something wrong.
yeah,
I really think about the ambivalence as a function of there's a lot at stake.
yeah.
And anytime you're making a big decision where there's a lot at stake, it's normal to have doubts. You're going to
Yes.
second guess yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, even just think about if you were going to make a complete career change or move
Right.
across the country, it would be completely normal to
Mm-hmm.
have second thoughts. Even like people getting married, it's very common to
Right.
have cold feet, right?
Yes.
Doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. And then the other thing here is that you're doing something that is really going against the grain. It
Right.
is there's a lot of social pressure, as we
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, to
Yeah.
stay engaged with the family system. And so recognizing again that you are doing something that the rest of society is telling you is wrong. So, of
Yes.
course, that social pressure is going to add to the second thoughts and the ambivalence and the feeling like I'm doing something wrong, I'm doing something
Yeah.
bad, those feelings of guilt, all
Mm-hmm.
super common. So again, I think it's helpful to frame that as just it's a normal thing to feel that way,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not indicative of it being the wrong choice for you. Um,
Yes.
Certainly, it's helpful to understand why you're making the choice, and
Mm.
I think talking about that with a safe person
Yeah.
or writing it down can be really helpful
Mm.
in getting the clarity that you need. Because again, the ambivalence may linger there, but it's still good for you to say, okay, I know why I've gotten to this point. I know why I'm making this decision. So when somebody says to you, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing that? They question your decision. They put the guilt trip on you.
Yes.
Um, you don't necessarily need to explain it to them or justify it to them, but you want
Mm-hmm.
to know inside yourself that I've thought this through. I've given this a lot of thought. I've reflected on it. I've, talked it over with my dear friend or my therapist or my coach or a spiritual advisor, whoever
Mm-hmm.
that might be for you. And I know that I have exhausted all reasonable options here. I've given it my best shot. And that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that I need to keep giving it, my best shot
Right.
for the rest of my life, right? It is okay to say this is not working for me. And
Yes.
that's a reasonable conclusion to come to.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think if we frame this as this is something that I am doing for my own well being, and I deserve to be happy and healthy and to
Yes.
be free of relationships that are toxic and hurtful and harmful to me.
Mm-hmm.
Then we can start to give ourselves the
Yeah.
permission that will help lessen the ambivalence. But again,
Yeah.
I would say don't be concerned if that ambivalence and those second, guesses continue for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Um, it's really such a painful decision, such a painful situation to have been in.
Yeah.
And again, if we remember that, the decision itself is really painful and difficult, but everything that led up to it has been
Yep.
really painful and difficult. And that's again, years and years, worth of challenges and people putting
Mhm.
you down often and second guessing you. That for a lot of folks who are in this situation, they have also really been essentially trained from a very young age not to trust their own feelings, not to trust their instincts, not to feel like their needs are valid or important. So again, we're working against a lot of the things that we learned about ourselves. And so that
Mm.
can be a pretty lengthy process of undoing some of that. Um,
Yeah.
and it can come, but recognize that if you're just sort of fresh at this of, thinking about how much contact you want to have or considering pulling back, um, that there are a number of things that are working against you in terms of just feeling super confident about it.
Right. Right. It's helpful to know that that doubt is natural. It makes sense given the gravity of the decision.
Hmm.
And I appreciate you saying the other piece, which is you're going up a lot against a lot of messaging and years of conditioning that you don't talk about it, you don't disrupt the system, you just kind of get in line. Your needs don't get to take up space at the forefront.
Yeah.
So just know there's a lot of unlearning to do, and that takes time.
Hmm.
Makes sense. So
Yeah, absolutely.
you mentioned that you don't have to explain yourself to other people, but what about those family members or those people who really lean into the guilt to
Hmm.
make amends? Like, oh, that's your mother, you're gonna regret it later, they're doing the best they can. How do we navigate those conversations?
Well, I think as you're getting at here is there are some people who are just going to keep at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They they really need a firm boundary from you that is very clear in saying either this is not something I want to talk about with you, the way that you're approaching it is hurtful,
Yeah.
um, something along those lines. And
Yeah.
so that there is a very clear message of saying this is a decision that I have made. And again, this is where, sometimes even if you feel some doubt still, you want to project out that you have more
Sure.
confidence in it and saying,
Right.
this is a decision that I've made for myself. I appreciate
Yeah.
your concern, but I really don't want to talk about it with you. Or, I'll let you know if I want your input or your advice, but right now I've got it covered. Or
Mm.
again, you can play around with the phrases, and when doing this, it can be really helpful again to write down some sample scripts for yourself
Mm.
so that it feels like it's authentic, a way that you would say it to somebody, and or practice it with somebody that
Mm.
you feel safe doing that, so that when those inevitable conversations and
Yeah.
comments come up, because it for most people it's fairly predictable. If I ask them, who is going to challenge you, who's going to push your boundaries on this, who's going to put the guilt trip on you, they know
Yeah.
who it's going to be
Yeah.
most likely. Um and so be prepared for it.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's, your best defense here is have a plan, know
Yeah.
what you're going to say. You can say it in a direct and clear way, but also with kindness. It doesn't need to be harsh or mean. And again, I think when we have planned it out and we feel prepared, we're much more likely to say it in a nice way than it to just be
True.
that reflexive in the moment. I can't
Right.
believe you're, saying this to me again, for the 20th time.
Yeah.
Here I am, asking you to please, leave
Yeah.
leave me to figure this out for myself.
Hmm.
um so certainly I think there's a group of people that we need to have that real clear,
Yeah.
firm boundary with, and just basically be saying, this is off limits.
Yeah. Hmm.
Right. um the gray area of course is much harder to figure out, which is,
Yes.
are there some people in your life that it does make sense to explain a little bit more about the situation?
Mhm.
And I say this because I think there are. often some people who truly are well-meaning and have had they have families that are functional, and they truly cannot understand
Yes.
that families could treat people the way your family has treated you. And so it's like they just, you're kind of speaking a different language to them almost. And
Mhm.
so for these folks, sometimes sharing a little bit more about what your experiences have been can help them to understand, and then they can be more compassionate
Yeah.
towards you. But again, this is, it's a very vulnerable thing to do because, um, certainly any time that we are talking about painful experiences, abuse that we have experienced, there is the chance that people will not understand, that they would minimize that or even potentially use it against you. Um,
Hmm.
so we want to, weigh that decision carefully. The upside of course is that it can also bring a lot of closeness to a relationship when we share something vulnerable about ourselves, right? And then
Yeah.
often the other person will reciprocate and share something more vulnerable about them. And then, right, we develop this emotional connection
Yeah.
that can be quite powerful. But we don't, we, I really don't want, I hope that people don't end up in a situation where they, are really just feeling like I'm needing to, again, sort of justify my reasons, because that's not what we're talking about here. We're really talking about if it's a situation where we can, genuinely be building, closeness and connection in a trusting way, rather than I'm, giving you the list of all the things that my parents did to me, and you're over there saying, it doesn't, sound
Right.
like that was that bad, right? If you
Right.
start getting that vibe from somebody, I would definitely say, pull back.
Yes.
It's not, this relationship isn't in a place where this is going to be helpful for you.
Yeah. It's true that some people are going to approach with curiosity, wanting to understand, but we may have that reaction that, oh, everyone is trying to push my boundaries here, but that's not true.
Mhm.
Some people might just want to be getting to know you, understanding, because they did have a different experience. But yeah,
Mhm.
look out for those markers of safety. Are they curious, or are they questioning or minimizing? That's a good way to check in and see, is this somebody I want to share with? Because this is a very vulnerable part of your life.
Yeah, I like that way of phrasing it. Are they curious? And then, you're constantly evaluating their
Yeah.
response, right? Again, share
Right.
something smaller and see how they respond. And then if it goes well, you can share more.
Yeah, that's true. Just slowly open up different levels.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
as you and
Exactly. We don't want to just start with everything all at once if we're
right.
not sure about how this person is going to react and if they're going to be able to be supportive.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the hardships of making this decision, of communicating it to others. Is there a point that we get to feel acceptance? We get to feel some peace with it. What does that look like?
Hmm. Good. It's a good transition, because you're right. We have talked so much about how challenging it is and how painful it all can be. Um, but obviously, once we start to truly accept the reality of our family situation, it then allows us to move forward or have some, freedom from from the situation, right? There's sort of this liberation. There's often relief that people feel when they cut ties, or, again, when they have some lesser amount of contact with family members that are being hurtful to them. So, absolutely, there's healing really that can come from this. And I think, as you're saying, we want to be thinking about how can we accept both our decision and the reality of the dysfunction in the family that led us to have to make the decision. Um, because that's where we're able to move beyond the second guessing and the self-doubt about it, because we are grounded in this reality of knowing that there are certain problems in our family, and knowing from our life experience that it's unlikely to change. And from there, we're able to, I think, grieve what has happened in the family. And also, so that's sort of grieving the reality again of what is, and also being able to grieve what you didn't get, um, the family that you never had, the love that you didn't get from your family, the acceptance. Um, so there's often this, I don't know, I kind of just call it, the dream of wishing for your family to be different, or, it could be something very specific, wishing they were going to be like, that sitcom family on TV, or your best friend's family. We get so much messaging about what a loving, supportive family is supposed to look like and what they are supposed to do. And so when you don't have that, there's a loss of something that's sort of intangible, um, because you didn't have it. So you're kind of like, well, how do you grieve something that you don't have? But again, I think if we can acknowledge that's a loss, because it's something that we all want to have. And it's something that, when it doesn't exist, leaves a real hole for you. It's again, there's something that's missing that I think can kind of hold, kind of carries with you, just this sense of, not having, missing something, that you were supposed to have.
Yeah, it's so true. It's difficult to grieve an experience you never actually lived, but you've only
Mhm.
seen from the outside. So it sounds like the path to acceptance, though, is through grief work, is honoring those losses.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And
Yeah.
again, like I was saying, I think, just being really, cognizant of what is
Hmm.
happening in the family, because again, that allows us to make peace with our decision, because we understand why we had to make it.
Right.
Right. If we aren't realistic about what's happening, then we stay in the wishful thinking stage of
Yeah.
things. We're thinking, oh, maybe it'll get better. Maybe something will change. This year,
Yep.
Christmas will be different, or
Yep.
Mother's Day will be different. And as long as we are stuck in that place, we're never going to move forward. We're going to just
Right.
continue again and again, putting up with mistreatment, making excuses for it, coming up with some other, way of trying to resolve the problems ourselves. And, again, if we're honest with ourselves, we can say, here's how long this has been going on. Here's the various things that I've tried over the years. Here's been the impact of it on me. Here's been the impact on other people, and so forth. And again, if we sort of look at it almost in sort of this factual way, we can say, okay, this doesn't make sense for me
Yeah.
to continue to suffer.
Hmm.
Given the information that I have, I don't have any indication here that things are going to change,
Right. There's no
right?
data.
Right. I mean, if you did get some information that something had changed, and again, something concrete here, and I'm talking about something like, let's just say, if part of the family dysfunction was, your mother's alcoholism, and you hear that mom has gone to rehab and she's got 6 months clean and sober, that would be a factual piece of information
Yeah.
that says, okay, well, maybe something might be changed here.
Right.
Right. But again, short of that information, your cousin just saying, oh, your mom seems great, that's not enough information, right, to say,
No.
okay, something has really changed here. So I'm talking about something, really very specific, that we can go on,
Hmm.
because again, otherwise we're just living in a fantasy land of wishing things are going to be different. And that
Hmm.
unfortunately is just a setup for more pain and
Yeah.
suffering for us. Again, I think this path to acceptance and healing really has
Hmm.
to include accepting of how bad things are. And again, that's not an
Yeah.
easy thing to do. I mean, even though I think most people who are listening to this are obviously not in complete denial, or they wouldn't even be
Right.
listening to this conversation, right? But again, it's very common, and it's very understandable that you can want to have a certain amount of denial, because
Yeah.
again, it's very painful to acknowledge just how problematic your family has been, and how hurtful they have been.
Yeah, it's true. It's a hard reality to look at and
Yeah.
face, but such a necessary part of the process. It's not just accepting this decision, it's accepting the reality of your family and
Yeah.
know and just saying, this is how my family operates. And if it's not changing, I need to make a different choice for myself to survive, have a
Yes.
chance. Um, yeah, and so when you're second guessing, looking at what's in front of you. That's what helps me actually. I'm like,
Hmm.
wait, this is still happening. This is still happening. The past is still the past. Okay,
Right.
I feel justified in my decision. And yeah, we really need to sit with it and yeah, the denial helps you get through for a while, but at some
Yeah.
point it stops working because then you just keep getting hurt.
Well, yeah, and again, I mean, if we use the analogy of substance use or addiction, I mean, it's that same kind of thing, is right.
Yeah,
The denial does help minimize the pain while you're in that situation, but if anything is going to change, we have to break through the denial, right? We have to say
absolutely.
this is right, what's really happening. So,
Mhm.
it is a key piece of it.
Yeah, so important. Well, Sharon, as we start to wrap up, I wonder if there's a final message you could share with the HSPs who are listening who are on that spectrum of estrangement that you talked about.
Yeah.
What message could you leave them with?
Excuse me. Um, well, first of all, I really want to reiterate that this is not your fault. It's very easy to get into a place of self-blame and feeling guilty and feeling inadequate, or that you're doing something wrong, the shame, all of that. Again, because we can feel things so deeply, we're very susceptible to the pressure, um, either from society at large or very specific people in our lives, and just internal, as well, that we will take that on and internalize it.
Yeah.
And so try to remind yourself that it is okay. It's actually very healthy and necessary to put your needs first and to take care of yourself. I probably, say this every time I talk about anything, I feel like, but, self-compassion is just so important.
Yeah.
It's so necessary for us to get through challenging situations in our lives. Again, so to acknowledge that this is painful, this is a struggle, it is a difficult situation, and then to try to give yourself some kindness, some love, some support, is really super important. I think also, um, trying to get support from the outside is really important as well. And I say this, knowing that it's really hard as an introvert myself. It's not easy to ask for support. And again, on a topic that is very misunderstood and, sometimes demonized, it's extra difficult, excuse
Mm-hmm.
me, to
Mm-hmm.
reach out for support. And I will also say, I mean, another unfortunate challenge is there's not as much support out there as there needs to be for adult children who are in this situation. It's not an uncommon situation,
Mm-hmm.
um, but you wouldn't know that if you went looking for
No.
specifically for support groups or sometimes even for therapists who
Yeah.
specialize in this. So again, it's challenging, and I know there's some roadblocks, there, but, whether that's professional support or informal support, just friends, we definitely know that any kind of challenging life situation, it's helpful to get support. It helps lighten our load,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, when we have other people there for us. So try to do that, even again, if that's just baby steps, of
Mm-hmm.
trying to build some connections in person, online,
Yes.
again, with the therapist or somebody else, as well. And then my last thing that I will say is just, again, one more reiterating that, despite what anybody else says, cutting ties, no contact, low contact, whatever form that takes for you, can absolutely be a healthy decision for you. And again, I say that, as a therapist who sees this every day, that I have so many clients who tell me, I'm so glad I did this. It was so difficult, but my only regret is that I didn't do it sooner. Honestly,
Yeah.
I hear a lot. And again, there's not a lot of research yet, but there is some, again, that also indicates that this can be a healthy decision for you. So again, as we're doing it, we're really working against a lot of those social structures that are telling us otherwise. But just like any other dysfunctional relationship, it's really hard to heal when you're still in the dysfunctional or abusive relationship. So again, I mean,
Yeah.
stepping aside, stepping back from it, whether that's temporary or whether that's permanent, really can give us the space, the time, the energy that we need to do some of the emotional healing. And then again, you can reevaluate whether you want to have any, contact with this person in the future or not. That will be up
Hmm.
to you. But again, I think you're probably better equipped to make that decision once you have been able to do some of the healing work
That's,
that will benefit
yeah,
you.
that's so true, right? Get yourself out of the tornado
Yeah.
so you can get some perspective, right? And then you can decide from there. And just like any boundary, it's flexible. You get to
Yeah.
change your mind, but just being able to carve out some of that compassion for yourself is so critical, and just figuring out what you need to do next.
Yeah.
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 Thank you so much, Sharon. It's so true that there is a deficit of resources in this area, so I was especially excited to see your new book come out, Cutting Ties with Your Parents. I'll share that in the show notes for folks, plus your other books on boundaries and perfectionism, your website, your social media, just so folks can dive in and start to reflect and lean into some of these resources. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.